everybody, Alex Kapitko here, and this is the Centered from Reality podcast. Sorry this episode's a little late. I usually try to put them out earlier on Wednesdays, but I had a pretty big exam this morning and kind of messed up the whole schedule for today. But I'm sitting here looking out my window. It is snowing very hard, and I have an aerial video of Spain on my TV where the beaches look warm, people look happy, and it makes me miss Spain. But anyways, it's always nice to kind of feel warm and cozy inside and watch the snow coming down outside. So it's a good day for that. Anyways, as I was doing this episode, I saw that Pentagon officials are currently holding a briefing, I guess, as Biden is approving to send more troops to Europe. Apparently, Russian troops are getting more and more abundant on the Ukrainian border, which, as we've talked about, may be a bad sign. It also may just be Putin doing his thing. I read that Ukrainians are less worried than we are about it because they're kind of used to these flexes. But we're just going to have to see. I don't like to see this escalation no matter what. Probably next week, I'm going to talk about this topic more once things happen over the weekend or don't happen over the weekend, hopefully. But, it's just an ever-changing subject, and I don't really have a lot to comment on just because it keeps changing. I still encourage people to listen to my episode from a couple weeks ago about chaos in Kazakhstan and what Putin really wants, because I think it kind of highlights, at least in my eyes, what is happening over there. But anyways, I want to start with some thoughts on Trump's anti-glorious rally in Texas, if that's a word, that happened over last weekend. And I'll clarify that I did not watch it. I just couldn't get myself to do it. I've been pretty busy, and I just don't have the time to watch that guy rant. I would probably need a couple drinks and to completely blur out the fact that he actually has political power in this country. But even at 2 times speed, it just gets exhausting, He's really gotten worse at speaking, I will say, because while I didn't watch it, I have watched clips. And he just has a lot of issues. He just mixes words together, and it's just getting kind of old, And I find it funny because Fox News and many on the right have convinced Americans, or at least some Americans, that Biden has dementia and has really bad speaking issues. But with Biden, it's clear to me he's old and has always had a stutter, and he sometimes takes time to really work on that. You'll see him kind of close his eyes or slow down. That's just typical speech therapy. But Trump kind of glitches out, and I don't like to make fun of anybody for that stuff, but he's a whole other case. I want to talk about this rally. Oops, sorry, bumped the microphone. For a few minutes, though, just because of how dangerous it actually was. Trump did a lot of his usual word salads, the glitches, talks about gas prices being like $40 in California, supply chain issues. I guess he has short-term memory or selective memory because he seems to forget that these same things happened under his presidency. Then, he went into the election lies, discussions of how the left is racist against white Americans, all that fun, just kind of counter anti-racism. And none of that was very surprising. I keep getting tempted to want to play a drinking game with friends over watching a Trump rally and just kind of playing like Trump bingo or something, because he pretty much says the same thing every time. But the worst part was when Trump went to kind of new highs, or I guess more accurately, new lows, in describing what happened on January 6th. So during the rally, Trump claimed that those who have been charged on the January 6th attack are being treated, quote, unfairly. He also made it clear that if he were president again, some of the rioters may deserve pardons. He told the crowd, in quotes here, "If I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons," end quotes. And I'll get to why that's, in my opinion, so bad in a moment. But Trump also continued on to discuss how his supporters should engage in the biggest protest ever. Now, I don't think I need to remind most of you about what happened last time he called for the biggest protest ever. Let's just say it kind of evolved from a protest, from a peaceful protest, or a tourist visit, as Ron Johnson from Wisconsin likes to say. But back to Trump's pardon comments. As you guys, I'm sure, are aware, I've been reading a lot over the last year about fascism. I remember Madeleine Albright in her book Fascism: A Warning, which is great, depending on how you view great, discusses how a leader in a fascist movement will kind of encourage their supporters to do extra legal actions for them and then promise legal protection for doing it. I always think about the thugs in Mussolini's Italy that would intimidate people not to vote or would beat up the opposition or the perceived communists. The same thing was in Spain, Nazi Germany. You could go down the list. Ron DeSantis wants people to watch the voting happening in 2022 and 2024, but that's a whole other case. But anyways, they likely, I guess the way you would put it is these supporters, I guess, feel emboldened to do this because they know that they have the protection of the leader. And I've always felt like fascism requires kind of an extra legal side where citizens use violence outside of the stretches of the law. It's kind of like, well, we're going to do something that's not legal because the extremity of what's happening in the country justifies it. And so when Trump told his supporters that he would pardon some of them for January 6th, he's basically saying that anyone who does violence for him or for his bidding will be protected if he's back in power. So that's a very dangerous incentive, but I'm sure it works on people. I have no doubt that it works on people, and that's a whole other thing that terrifies me. But it kind of brings me to a scarier reflection in a lot of ways is I think there's a little bit of it on both sides. Like, we're definitely seeing kind of a creeping authoritarianism around the world, but it's obviously worse on the right. So don't take that out of context. But it seems like both sides right now think that the other side is a cult or crazy or antithetical to their existence. And when each side thinks that the other side is existentially dangerous, then that kind of gives them the rationale to throw out the democratic rulebook. This kind of leads to a revolutionary thought process because when the other side is a risk, an existential risk, to your vision of where the country should be, you're going to go outside of the borders of what is acceptable to fix it. And trust me, I'm not saying Trump is Hitler or Franco or anything like that, but he is feeding that idea that you can use extra legal measures to solve a problem. And, I think it was in Franco's Spain, they would say, well, we're just going to do this temporarily to get rid of the communists. Nothing's temporary, right? And that is truly this disturbing, creeping authoritarianism, and Trump's feeding it. I don't know if he actually understands the ramifications of what he's doing, but he's absolutely feeding it. Now, I do see that Trump is slipping somewhat in the polls, and DeSantis is doing much better than expected. And I talked about that a few weeks ago. I don't really think it matters who the leader is at this point, to be honest. The anger is there. DeSantis has his own issues. I think he's smarter. He wants poll intimidation. He wants his own state militia. He's against protesting. He has his own issues. But the cult of personality, I think, has kind of evolved away from Trump. It's like Frankenstein's monster in a lot of ways. As Trump kind of let the cat out of the bag, and now it's like the cat is eating everything, and Trump's just like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing rallies or something. But Trump is the figurehead, but I wonder if it's going to keep evolving. Is it still going to be Trumpism? Or is it going to need a new name? The conundrum that I come to in some ways is whether Trump is better or worse than, say, a DeSantis. Because he says the quiet stuff out loud, and he's almost just this reckless, bumbling fool in a lot of ways. It seems like he's really not good at getting away with things, which I guess doesn't really matter because our bar for what's acceptable has completely shifted. But I think true electoral fascism, like I've talked about a few times, needs laws and systematic changes, not giant rallies with people screaming and chanting. And I think that's why Viktor Orban is so popular on the right. He's created autocracy through the legal system of democracy. And I worry that someone like Ron DeSantis with the right people around him would try to duplicate that, I guess. The last thing I'll add is, because I don't want to stick much longer on this topic, is that I am surprised that people like Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins of Maine don't speak up more. Even Mitt Romney's been fairly silent, which I think shows you maybe how polarized our country is when even the never-Trumpers are not really getting much of a platform. But I guess they're aware of what the Republican base wants and they're just shutting up. For example, Susan Collins just got reelected to a 6-year term. She doesn't have to worry about what the voters want, at least for a little bit, in terms of Trumpism and keeping Trump happy and blah, blah, blah. But she was on one of those Fox News programs last week. I forget which one. I saw the clip a lot. And she mentions that she was very against Trump's statement of pardoning rioters, and she was against the rally. And you could see visibly that she is not a Trump gal. It's very clear. But she always stops short of saying she would be against him if he ran in 2024, or he shouldn't run. She said, actually, if I remember it right, not verbatim, but she said something like, it's very unlikely he's going to run in 2024. And, I don't agree with that unless DeSantis keeps just spiraling upwards in the polls, but I don't trust Susan Collins' foresight anymore. She was the one back in early 2020 who said that Trump had learned his lesson from the first impeachment and wouldn't act out again. Look where we are now. I don't think that panned out. So it's just kind of surprising. Like Senator Alexander, who I think retired right before the COVID pandemic got going. He retired because I think he knew where the Republican Party was going. But he couldn't even speak out against Trump to a really good direction. So it's like, what are these people doing? It's like, especially if you have nothing to lose, why not just say something? But I guess it doesn't matter anymore. Maybe they're right. Anyways, I do want to move on to kind of the main thing I want to talk about today. And it's another nice and rosy topic, but it looks at the other side in a less than ideal light, I guess we could say. So what if I were to tell you that there's a new report that looks at how General McKenzie, who serves as the 14th commander of the U.S. Central Command, which is operating out of the Middle East, had a discussion with Taliban officials before the withdrawal from Afghanistan, so back in August, July, that time period. And during this dialogue, he was asked if the withdrawal effort wanted to have the city of Kabul to carry out the evacuation and airlifts. What if I also told you that because of orders from the White House, McKenzie basically denied the Taliban's offer to have the whole city to do this withdrawal and evacuation? Well, that is what's been mentioned actually in this new scathing report by George Packer in The Atlantic called The Betrayal. Apparently the Taliban wanted the United States to leave so badly that they were willing to let the United States Army and the State Department and all the other apparatuses there use the entire city of Kabul to carry out the withdrawal. The Taliban were basically saying, we'll stay away from the whole city because we want you out that fucking bad. They just didn't want to get in the way. And also, I don't think the Taliban are as popular in Kabul as in other parts of the country. It's a little more metropolitan, a little bit more educated, less fundamental. So I would imagine the Taliban would probably see some opposition there. So they were giving the U.S. a chance to basically stay out of the city. But instead, I guess the U.S. only wanted to control the airbase. So they wanted to kind of speed up the whole Taliban retaking Kabul situation. And because the U.S. only took the airbase, this kind of led to all the chaos that we saw. Security issues, the inability to get many of our allies out, even if they had visas that were applicable to the situation. And then that IED by, ISIS-K or whatever, that killed women, children, and American troops. And in this article, Packer implies that the administration wanted to get out basically so badly that they quite literally effed up everything and pretty much burned bridges with allies and neighboring countries and just really diminished our reputation. I wanted to start with that portion just because it's the most alarming for me. Now I'm going to actually just go over the article a little bit and just give some thoughts after that. First, I will just say that George Packer's a great author, writer. Everyone should check him out. But this long article in The Atlantic, which actually, it took me a while to read. It took me about an hour and a half, which is quite large, quite extensive for a publication. But the article is basically just a very damning look at the withdrawal, and Packer directly relates it to Saigon and kind of relates it because of Biden's moral blind spots in regards to troop withdrawals and how we value our allies. And let's remember that the withdrawal was when Biden's ratings truly began to plummet. And since then, honestly, he really hasn't recovered. And maybe that tells us more than we were first thinking. I'll just briefly summarize this because it's long, but there's reviews in other magazines and publications. Read the article, listen to it. I do recommend people check it out because it's not all the revelations are new, but the way it's written and some of the new information makes it quite a significant bombshell, and not in a good way. So to start, it's important to make it absolutely clear that Biden didn't cause the Taliban government to rise again. And Packer makes that very clear in the article. He also mentions that it's not Biden's fault that Afghanistan was a lost cause. But this article looks at the moral failures of the administration that made things much worse. And I'll just say that it does bring up questions about Biden's leadership. But the article looks at the complete failure to properly get out combat interpreters, Afghani support staff, intelligence informants, and just people that had been helping us on the ground for nearly 2 decades. And the alarming part here is that many of these people had the proper visas to be evacuated out, or were not given the opportunity to actually get the visas because of the chaotic situation the Trump administration put in. And then there was the chaotic situation in the Kabul withdrawal, where many people were left behind. Of course, it gets worse when you can only imagine, what the Taliban will and probably have already done to these people, right, who helped the U.S. The Taliban wanted us to leave because we're a foreign power that was pretty much invading their country. But the people that helped us, they can't go anywhere now because of what happened, and they have been treated quite bad. And I'm sure at least most of you have, heard the heartbreaking stories about our friends and allies who were left behind, children falling off planes, parents fighting with patrols to get through barriers. When you see kids falling off planes or parents trying to just get their kids, throwing their kids at American soldiers, I think that tells you about the situation. And it was always appalling to me that the administration said it was a very successful airlift out. My eyes aren't perfect. I wear glasses, but just from what I saw, that did not look like a perfect airlift out of there. Packer adds in this article that even though the administration called this a huge success, even if it was ugly, nearly 90% of Afghans who were eligible for relocation were left behind in Afghanistan. And again, like I said, that's not success to me. Unless you're sending a message that you really don't care about our allies or friends. And that's kind of what Packer implies here. The majority of the article goes into some troubling revelations on Biden and kind of how he's viewed a lot of foreign conflicts. He discusses how it was clear that the administration saw their goal to get the United States military, citizens, and foreign service officers out of the country, but I guess that didn't include the people that we dragged into the conflict and then risked their lives to help us. I want to read kind of a little passage from the article because it kind of goes into how there's been recordings on the Senate floor from back in the 70s, actually, that go over Biden's views on Vietnam, which are actually very similar to this, and not really in a good way. No matter what you think of Vietnam, I think it's interesting. So it says here in quotes, on April 14th, 1975, as North Vietnamese divisions raced towards Saigon, the 32-year-old first-term senator from Delaware was summoned to the White House. President Gerald Ford pleaded with him and other senators for funding to evacuate Vietnamese allies. Biden refused. I feel put upon, he said. He would vote for money to bring out the remaining Americans, but not $1 for the locals. On April 23rd, as South Vietnam's collapse accelerated, Biden repeated the point on the Senate floor. I do not believe the United States has an obligation, moral or otherwise, to evacuate foreign nationals, other than diplomats, he said. That is the job of private organizations. The United States has no obligation to evacuate 1 or 100,000 South Vietnamese. End quotes. Now again, you can think what you want about our involvement in Afghanistan or Vietnam. That's really not the issue here. It's about accountability and morality. Packer writes, If on the way out of Afghanistan, America broke its promises to people at great risk of revenge killings, its already battered international reputation would be further damaged. Such a failure would also injure the morale of American troops, who were now staring at a lost war, and whose code of honor depended on leaving no one behind. End quotes. And I think that's the heartbreaking reality, guys. Like, this is not about the policies or the tactics or even the rationale for Afghanistan, but it's about what we did to the people who risked everything for us. As I read this article and prepared for the podcast, I just thought about the hope that has been lost there, the intense famine that has hit the country since we left, the fuel shortages, China moving in, and they're really known for their human rights, and just the return to a medieval society, basically, where women went from schools to probably not going to be going down that road in a couple of years. And I don't disagree with pulling out. I think in the long run, it was the right thing to do. But just the disregard for our allies just makes the whole thing really hard to swallow. Now, I need to be fair here that Biden isn't the only one guilty here. The Trump administration made this even more difficult and maybe even planted the seed of why we couldn't get out more Afghan friends and allies. According to Packer, there's a representative from Colorado who's a Democrat named Jason Crow, and he visited the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. I think it was back during the Trump presidency. I don't have a date here, but he found a skeletal staff working on visas only part-time in the U.S. Embassy there. And apparently this was a result of actions taken by Stephen Miller, Trump's vampire-like terrifying aide. And Packer writes that Miller, the anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim Trump advisor, along with allies throughout the executive branch, added so many new requirements that amid the pandemic, the program nearly came to a halt. By the time Biden gave his speech, at least 18,000 desperate Afghans and tens of thousands of family members stood in a line that was barely moving. So yeah, no one is unscathed here. No one is unscathed here. And, we had Fox News and many Republicans like the Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes demagoguing this issue, especially during the pandemic. There was a weird comparison between people on the southern border. Every year the Republicans and Fox News freak out about caravans at the southern border. And in this case, unfortunately, the Afghan refugees were kind of lumped into this anti-migrant rhetoric. And that's just racism at the end of the day. There's a conversation to be had about immigration, but I think we should have allowed a lot of these Afghan refugees into the country. I think they've earned that respect, and I want to say it was Tom Cotton. Forgive me if it wasn't him, but I think it was him who had said we don't want to risk bringing terrorists into the country. Well, when all these congressmen and women and senators, voted for these wars, I'm sure they liked the support we were getting over there. They weren't terrorists then, so it's all just kind of just despicable. I just wish the Biden administration had worked harder, or at least been transparent and maybe listened to more experts on the ground, because unfortunately there does seem to be a trend with Biden here. The last thing I'll add, and it's kind of a parallel issue to this, is that Bill Galston of the Brookings Institute, wrote a very interesting piece back in November of 2021. I remember reading it then going, damn, I want to bring this into the podcast at some point. And unfortunately, now is the time. So it's a not a happy article called Anger, Betrayal, and Humiliation, How Veterans Feel About the Withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Galston talks about kind of what the brutal end of this conflict has done to the morale of our troops. He discusses a survey from More in Common, which from what I've gathered is an organization that looks to identify causes for our polarized politics in the United States. And this is kind of relevant for this one because the study looks at kind of troop opinions about the end of the war and the withdrawal. And according to the numbers, Afghan veterans number about 775,000, many with multiple tours of duty. And 73% feel betrayed. 67% feel humiliated. 2/3 of all Americans and more than 7 in 10 veterans believe that veterans of the war in Afghanistan are going to have a hard time processing the end of the war. 56% of veterans do not believe that American society will move on. And I personally think that many of these veterans may feel so angry and lost because of, how we pulled out and how for years they were working with our allies and friends there, and we just left them behind. I keep reading accounts about the close bond that was built between our service members and the Afghan troops that helped them. And I can only imagine just the many levels of failure that would come from this withdrawal. Again, I'm not against it. I'm just against how we did it. And in this piece, Galston discusses how we can't let these veterans become bitter, like those after Vietnam, who became isolated from society. Because I guess if you have a lot of a military that feels lost, bitter, and isolated, serious things can happen, especially in the context of where our country's at right now. I do encourage people to look at what happened in Germany after World War I, after that humiliating loss. Sorry, I can't speak. And what it did to their society and their military. It kind of made everyone bitter and isolated. And right now, we don't want a time for a fragmentation, I guess you could say, in the military like that. So it's definitely something to talk about. But I just think we need to have a conversation about, can we still get some of these people out? Like, what can we actually do humanitarian-wise? Because I understand we don't want to be there, but it's a little bit difficult now, because we basically did regime change in Afghanistan without nation building. Then we relied on our allies in the country, gave them hope, and then pretty much threw them away when we realized the war couldn't be won. And that's a very bad blind spot for Biden to have, I think. I just wanted to wrap up with something that's kind of troubling that I've been following for a couple days. Black History Month started yesterday, and unfortunately, the black community is still being targeted and attacked, or attempted attacks at almost every angle. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but there have been numerous reports over the last, I want to say 3 days, of bomb threats at HBCU schools across the country. Those are historically black colleges and universities, and there's been a lot of bomb threats at them. I think over 20 schools have had to close campus on Tuesday, which was yesterday, or canceled classes due to bomb threats. It's an awful way to start Black History Month. Not that it matters what month it is or anything, but bomb threats on the first day of February at schools like Alcorn State, Howard University, Fort Valley State, the University of the District of Columbia, Kentucky State, Xavier University of Louisiana, Jackson State University, Mississippi Valley State University, a lot of schools. And it must be awful to feel like you can't even go to school because of that type of fear. I can't remember a bomb threat in my college days, and it's just unacceptable, in my opinion. I don't have actually a whole lot else to say on this, but it does look like the Homeland Security Chair, who's Benny Thompson, said they're taking it very, very seriously, and they're working with the FBI, and they're calling this an act of terrorism, which it is, even if it's a joke. Nothing's a joke at that level. As of an hour ago, I saw that ABC has reported that the FBI has identified 5 persons of interest in connection with these, and it's just really too bad and disturbing. So we'll have to keep watching on that story as well. But I'm not gonna draw any conclusive conclusions here, but I guess when you have a political party that keeps telling people violence is okay and keeps telling them white people are losing their power and pride, it's kind of creating breeding grounds for domestic terrorism. And unfortunately, minority communities are usually impacted. So it's something, sadly, to keep watching. But anyways, let me know your thoughts. Have I completely lost it in my takes this week? Do you agree? As always, let me know. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week. Hopefully with some good news on Ukraine. We'll have to keep it in mind, but you can find me on Twitter, YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all that jazz. And we'll see you later. Take care.